Have you ever said you want someone kind, but keep choosing coldness? Have you ever sworn you're done with emotionally unavailable men, but your body still reacts to the same quiet detachment over and over again? Have you ever said you want peace, but the moment someone truly safe enters your life, you feel nothing? It's not because you're broken. It's because your nervous system thinks chaos is chemistry, and your soul hasn't realized yet that you're still trying to outrun the archetype you were born to outgrow. Meet Clara, a 32-year-old therapist who knew all the red flags, could name every attachment style in her sleep, and had made a vow to never settle for less again. She had journals filled with self-awareness, affirmations stuck to her mirror, and a boundary list longer than a wedding registry. She attended workshops on conscious dating, read every book on attachment theory, did years of therapy. She was intellectually prepared for love, emotionally evolved, psychologically literate. She could spot a narcissist from across a crowded room. She knew the difference between love bombing and genuine interest. She understood trauma bonding, anxious attachment, and every shade of avoidance in between. But then he walked in. He wasn't charismatic in the traditional sense. He wasn't warm or generous. In fact, he barely gave her anything at all. 3-word texts, cancel plans, conversations that felt deep but led nowhere. And yet, she found herself checking her phone every 5 minutes, analyzing his one-word responses, replaying conversations to find hidden meanings, feeling more alive in his absence than she had ever felt in someone else's presence. The irony wasn't lost on her. Here she was, a trained professional who helped others recognize unhealthy patterns, completely magnetized by the exact energy she had promised herself she would avoid. She was watching herself fall into the same hole she had climbed out of 3 times before, and she couldn't seem to stop. Why? Because beneath her intellectual clarity lived an unconscious pull. To the archetype her shadow still mistook for love. The part of her that knew better was screaming. But the part of her that remembered being 5 years old, trying to earn her father's attention by being perfect, by being quiet, by being whatever she thought he needed. That part was driving. And that part had been waiting 30 years for someone who felt like home, even when home had never been safe. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." This is the truth most women don't want to admit. You're not addicted to a person. You are addicted to an archetype, one that was formed when you were still too young to name the difference between love and survival. Think about it. You meet someone emotionally available, present, consistent. They text back within hours. They make plans and keep them. They show up emotionally. They ask about your day and actually listen. And you feel nothing, not because they're wrong for you, but because they don't match the neurological blueprint your nervous system learned to call love. Your body doesn't recognize safety as attractive. It recognizes familiar pain as home. The blueprint was created in childhood. A distant father who praised you only when you performed perfectly. A mother too overwhelmed by her own pain to really see your needs. An older sibling who protected you emotionally, then left and never came back. Or maybe it was subtler. A household where emotions were inconvenient, where being too much meant being alone, where love had to be earned through silence, through perfection, through making yourself smaller until you almost disappeared. The Carl Jung shadow, Jung's term for the unconscious parts of yourself you've exiled, takes these fragments and builds an image. A template. A man who doesn't really choose you, but almost does. Who makes you work for scraps of attention. Who feels familiar in his unpredictability, comforting in his withdrawal. You say you want love, but what you're really craving is the familiar architecture of absence. Because the child in you still believes that if you can finally win this one, you can rewrite history. You can heal the original wound by getting a different ending. This is why emotionally available men feel boring to you. They don't offer a redemption arc. They don't trigger the part of you that needs to prove your worth. They just love you, consistently, without you having to earn it. And your nervous system doesn't know what to do with that. Let me tell you about Rachel. Rachel's father was a surgeon who worked 16-hour days. Her mother numbed her loneliness with wine and romance novels. Love, in Rachel's house, was demonstrated through worry, through sacrifice, through enduring someone's absence and calling it devotion. By the time Rachel was 10, she had learned that love meant waiting, that care meant concern, that passion meant pain. She watched her mother plan elaborate dinners he would miss, buy gifts for a man who forgot her birthday 3 years running. So Rachel grew up believing that emotional unavailability was a sign of depth, that mystery was romance, that having to decode someone's feelings was intimacy. Fast forward 25 years. Rachel finds herself in her third relationship with a man who doesn't believe in labels. She's analyzing text messages like hieroglyphs, Googling signs he's falling for you at 2 a.m., having the same conversation with her friends. I think he really cares, he's just scared of commitment. But Rachel isn't attracted to him. She's attracted to the familiar feeling of being almost loved, almost chosen, almost enough. The persona, Jung's mask of our socially acceptable self, tells her she wants partnership. But the shadow is running the show, and the shadow believes that love must be earned through suffering, that if someone loves you easily, they don't really see you. This is the split. Your conscious mind saying, I deserve better, while your unconscious seeks the same familiar pain. Your ego declaring, never again, while your shadow whispers, but maybe this time will be different. Take a moment. Notice what's happening in your body right now. Is there a familiar ache? A recognition? That's not weakness. That's awareness beginning to surface. Here's the truth that cuts the deepest. You don't miss him. You miss who you hoped he would become. You don't crave his presence. You crave the version of you that would finally be enough for someone who keeps leaving. You weren't in love. You were in a trauma reenactment, hoping for a different ending to a story that was never yours to carry in the first place. Let me tell you about Emma. Emma was 29 when she met David at a coffee shop in Brooklyn. He was reading Murakami, wore vintage band t-shirts, and had the kind of melancholy eyes that made her want to save him from his own sadness. He looked like he carried deep thoughts and profound wounds, and Emma had always been drawn to men who seemed to need healing. David was a freelance photographer who spoke about his art with passion, but couldn't seem to commit to anything. Not a lease, not a job, not a relationship. He was charming in his inconsistency, poetic in his unavailability. He would send her long, beautiful texts about how she inspired him, then disappear for days without explanation. For 3 months, Emma lived on breadcrumbs. A text here at 2 a.m. telling her she was amazing. A late-night call there when he was drunk and philosophical. Plans that were made and broken. Conversations that felt profound but led nowhere. She found herself Googling how to know if someone likes you at 2 a.m. Reading his texts to her friends like they were scripture. Analyzing every interaction for signs of deeper feeling. And when he finally told her he wasn't ready for anything serious but wanted to keep seeing where this goes, she stayed. Because Emma wasn't addicted to David. She was addicted to the feeling of being almost chosen, almost enough, almost worthy of the love she had been chasing since she was 7 years old, watching her parents' marriage dissolve in silent resentment. But here's what makes this so psychologically complex. Emma's attraction to David wasn't random. It wasn't bad luck or poor judgment. It was precise. Her unconscious mind had identified in David the exact emotional frequency that matched her original wound. His unavailability wasn't a bug in her system. It was a feature. Her psyche had found the perfect person to reenact her childhood trauma with. Emma's father had left when she was 6, and her mother had spent the next 10 years saying things like, "Men are just afraid of real love. Your father loved us. He just couldn't handle the responsibility. Some people run when things get too real." Emma learned that love meant being left. That commitment meant fear. That if someone truly saw you, they would eventually find you too much to handle. Jung wrote about this phenomenon in his concept of the animus, the unconscious masculine aspect of a woman's psyche. When this aspect is undeveloped or wounded, women often project their unconscious masculine onto men who embody the negative qualities they haven't integrated. They fall in love with their own disowned shadow, expecting the other person to carry what they cannot face in themselves. Emma's animus was wounded by a father who left and a culture that taught her that men who stay are somehow less masculine than men who run. So she unconsciously sought men who would require her to prove her worth through perfect understanding, infinite patience, and the ability to love someone despite their inability to love her back. She wasn't looking for love. She was looking for the chance to finally be enough for someone who couldn't see her. This is why the most devastating relationships feel like the most meaningful ones. Because they're not just relationships, they're assignments. Unconscious attempts to heal wounds that were never yours to heal in the first place. Let me tell you about another pattern I see constantly. There's Sophia, a 34-year-old lawyer who keeps dating men who are going through a difficult time. She's attracted to their vulnerability, their need for support, their emotional complexity. But what she doesn't realize is that she's drawn to their brokenness because it gives her permission to be needed without having to be fully seen. When someone needs you, you have a role. You have purpose. You have a reason to stay that has nothing to do with your inherent worthiness. You can love them without having to risk being loved back. You can give without having to receive. You can be the healer, the supporter, the understanding one. Roles that feel safe because they don't require you to show up as your full, complex, potentially too much self. Sophia realizes this pattern when she meets a man who doesn't need fixing, who has done his own therapy, who knows how to regulate his emotions, who wants to share a life rather than be saved from one. And she feels nothing because her nervous system doesn't recognize emotional health as attractive. It recognizes the familiar dance of caretaking as intimacy. The archetype you're addicted to isn't real. It's a hologram of unfinished grief, of emotional patterning, of internalized neglect. It's the part of you that learned early that love is scarce, that attention must be earned, that your worth is determined by someone else's capacity to see you. But here's what makes this so insidious. The more unavailable someone is, the more your nervous system interprets their distance as valuable. Scarcity feels like desire. Inconsistency feels like passion. Having to chase feels like chemistry. This is why when someone emotionally available enters your life, your body doesn't react. There's no adrenaline, no obsessive thoughts, no sleepless nights wondering what they're thinking. Because your nervous system has confused trauma responses with love responses. It doesn't recognize safety as attractive. It recognizes familiar pain as home. That's why you keep choosing the wrong person. Not because you're broken, but because you're trying to heal in the same place you got hurt. You're not addicted to love. You're addicted to a loop. And the loop began with a wound. The wound that whispered, "You are too much and not enough," all at once. Love is something you earn, not something you receive. If they really knew you, they would leave. Your emotions are inconvenient. Your needs are a burden. You are only lovable when you're useful. So you learn to perform, to shrink, to become whoever you thought they needed you to be. And now, 30 years later, you're still auditioning for a part in someone else's movie instead of writing your own story. Jung called this process individuation, the psychological journey toward wholeness. But individuation requires facing the shadow. It requires acknowledging the parts of yourself you've disowned in order to survive. And it requires grieving the fantasy that someone else can heal the wounds you received in childhood. The most radical act isn't finding the right person. It's becoming the right person for yourself. It's learning to give yourself what you've been begging others to provide. It's recognizing that the love you're seeking outside exists within you, but it's been covered by years of conditioning that taught you to look everywhere except inside. What if I told you that the very thing you're running from, the fullness of who you are, is exactly what you've been seeking all along? What if the reason you feel empty in healthy relationships isn't because they're wrong for you, but because you've forgotten how to receive love without earning it first? Once Clara realized this, everything shifted. She stopped asking, "Why does he treat me this way?" and started asking, "Why does this feel like home?" She traced the pattern back to the nights her father would come home silent, disappearing into his office while she waited by the door with drawings she'd made for him, to the warmth she had to earn through perfect grades and perfect behavior, to the subtle belief that love must be chased, not received, to the way her mother would say, "I love you," but never really saw her, always distracted, always tired, always dealing with her own overwhelm. How affection came with conditions. How her needs were met with sighs instead of presence. How asking for attention felt like being selfish. She realized she wasn't looking for love. She was looking for the chance to finally be enough for someone who couldn't love her properly. She was trying to rewrite history with people who were incapable of giving her what she needed. But here's the thing about patterns. Once you see them, you can't unsee them. Claire started noticing when the pull would happen. That magnetic draw to someone's emotional unavailability. The familiar flutter in her stomach when someone was just out of reach. The way her nervous system would light up when someone seemed interested but distant, engaged but withholding. And instead of following the pull, she began to pause. She stopped blaming the men and started reparenting the part of her that confused anxiety for desire. It didn't happen overnight. There were relapses, moments where she found herself reaching for her phone, crafting the perfect text to someone who had made it clear they weren't interested. Moments where the urge to chase felt irresistible, where every cell in her body was screaming to pursue someone who was pulling away. But now she could name it. Not chemistry, not soulmate, not meant to be, just her shadow whispering, "This is where we got stuck last time." And this time, she didn't stay. She started asking herself different questions. What am I really hungry for here? What am I hoping this person will give me that I'm not giving myself? If I knew I was already worthy of love, how would I move through this differently? Sometimes the answer was simple. I'm lonely. Sometimes it was deeper. I want to matter to someone. And sometimes it was the most honest. I want to prove I'm lovable to someone who reminds me of everyone who couldn't love me the way I needed. But naming it took away its power. Clara began to notice something else. The men who actually cared about her, the ones who texted back consistently, who made plans and kept them, who showed up emotionally, they had always been there. She just hadn't been able to see them. Because her nervous system was so busy scanning for the familiar pain, it missed the unfamiliar peace. Maybe you recognize this in your own life. Have you ever dismissed someone as too available or trying too hard when they were simply interested? Have you ever felt bored by consistency, craved drama, mistook peace for emptiness? Jung wrote about this as the transcendent function, the ability to hold paradox without needing to resolve it immediately. Clara learned to hold the tension between her longing for unavailable love and her knowledge that she deserved better. Instead of collapsing into either extreme, she stayed present with both truths until a third option emerged, the possibility of loving herself enough to choose differently. She started practicing receiving, letting someone care about her without immediately looking for the catch, sitting with the discomfort of being seen without having to perform. It felt foreign at first, like wearing clothes that didn't fit, like speaking a language she had never learned. But slowly, her nervous system began to rewire. She learned that love doesn't have to be earned. That presence is more valuable than pursuit. That someone's inability to love her properly wasn't a reflection of her worth. It was information about their capacity. And the most surprising part? Once she stopped chasing unavailable love, she realized she had been unavailable too, not to others, but to herself. She had been so focused on earning external validation that she had abandoned her own inner knowing. She had been so busy trying to be enough for others that she had forgotten she was already enough, exactly as she was. This is what Jung meant by integration. Not the elimination of the shadow, but the conscious relationship with it. Clara didn't stop feeling drawn to unavailable men, but she stopped letting that attraction make her decisions for her. She learned to thank the part of her that was trying to protect her through familiar patterns and then choose a different path. The healing happened in the pausing, in the space between impulse and action, in the moments where she chose to stay with her own discomfort instead of seeking relief through someone else's attention. in learning to be intimate with her own loneliness instead of medicating it with relationships that depleted her. Clara described it to me like this. It's like I spent my whole life speaking a language I thought was love, but it was actually the language of longing, of earning, of proving. And now I'm learning a new language, the language of receiving, of being, of trusting that I am worthy of love not because of what I do, but because of who I am. She started to understand that her attraction to unavailable men wasn't random or masochistic. It was her psyche's attempt to master an early trauma, to finally get the love she had needed as a child from someone who resembled the person who couldn't give it to her then. But you can't heal the past by repeating it. You can only heal it by grieving it, integrating it, and choosing differently. The work became about learning to recognize love when it showed up in unfamiliar forms. Love that was steady instead of dramatic. Love that was present instead of elusive. Love that asked nothing of her except to be herself. Clara learned that real love doesn't feel like coming home to dysfunction. It feels like coming home to yourself. And that feeling is so foreign to someone who learned to abandon themselves for love that it can feel like nothing at all. But it's not nothing. It's everything. It's the foundation that makes everything else possible. And it is, in every sense, the quiet revolution at the heart of Carl Jung's shadow work. Healing doesn't always feel good. Sometimes it feels like emptiness, like watching your phone not light up and realizing you're okay with that. Like sitting with someone who doesn't need saving and realizing you don't know how to receive their softness. This is the work you must do. To unhook your nervous system from the drama it was wired to chase. To find stillness where there once was longing. To recognize love not as a performance, but as presence. It means sitting with the discomfort of being chosen without disappearing first. Learn to trust someone's interest instead of questioning it. Believing you're worthy of love, not because of what you do, but because of who you are. And it means grieving. Grieving the childhood where love felt conditional. Grieving years spent chasing people who couldn't see you. Grieving the part that believed you had to earn your place in someone's heart. Let me tell you about Maya. Maya was 35 when she finally broke the pattern. She just ended another relationship with a man who wasn't ready for commitment and was crying in her therapist's office. I keep doing the same thing over and over, she said. I know better. I can see the red flags. But I keep choosing men who make me feel like I'm not enough. Her therapist asked, what would happen if you were enough? Right now? Exactly as you are? Maya sat in silence, then said, I don't know. I've never considered that possibility. That was the beginning of Maya's individuation process. She questioned her assumptions. The belief that love required struggle. That relationships needed constant effort. That her worth was determined by someone else's ability to choose her. She began noticing men who'd always been interested, one she dismissed as too nice or boring. She realized what she'd labeled boring was actually consistency. What she'd called too nice was respect. What she'd experienced as lack of chemistry was absence of trauma bonding. Maya started dating differently. Instead of looking for that spark of recognition, the familiar feeling of being almost loved, she looked for genuine interest. Men who asked about her day and listened, who made plans and kept them. At first, it felt strange. Her nervous system kept waiting for drama to begin. But slowly, she appreciated the steadiness. The way she could sleep without checking her phone. Make future plans without wondering if he'd still be interested. The moment Clara chose herself, not as a declaration, but as a nervous system reality, everything shifted. The archetype no longer had power over her, because she was no longer seeking redemption. She was seeking truth. She'd always been enough, but she was finally choosing to act like it. She started saying no to plans that didn't feel good. Yes to people who made her feel calm instead of anxious. She stopped explaining herself to people who didn't care to understand. It wasn't about becoming someone new. It was remembering who she'd always been before the world taught her to hide. Before she learned love was something to earn rather than receive. Jung called this the return to the self. Not the ego self that performs, but the essential self that exists beyond roles. The part that knows your worth isn't negotiable, that understands love as your natural state. Clara understood those years of chasing unavailable love hadn't been wasted. They'd been preparation, training her nervous system to recognize the difference between love and its absence, teaching her to trust inner knowing over external validation. She learned to recognize the difference between someone who chooses you and someone who almost chooses you, between chemistry and trauma, between attachment and love, between being seen and being needed. Real intimacy isn't about merging until you disappear. It's about being fully yourself with another fully realized person. Two wholes coming together, not two as trying to complete each other. Love isn't something you fall into. It's something you rise into. A conscious choice to see and be seen, not despite your imperfections, but including them. So if you're watching this and you feel that familiar ache for someone who gives you crumbs instead of a meal, pause. Ask yourself, am I really in love or just trying to fix the past? Am I attracted to them or to the feeling of almost being chosen? What part of me believes love should feel like work? You're not crazy for wanting to be chosen, but you deserve to be chosen without having to disappear first. The archetype you're addicted to is just an echo of who you used to be, the part that learned to survive by becoming smaller, by earning love instead of receiving it. But you don't need to keep performing your pain to finally receive love. You just need to stop running from the part that always knew what real love felt like. That quiet, sacred part buried beneath the layers of your Carl Jung shadow. The emotional debris of all the times you were told your needs were too much, your voice too loud, your longing too inconvenient. That part is still there, waiting, not for someone else to see your worth, but for you to remember it. And when you do, when you finally come home to yourself, you'll see him clearly. Not as a god who can save you, not as a monster who can destroy you, just as a mirror, reflecting back the parts of yourself you haven't learned to love yet. And you'll walk away, not because you're angry, not because you're bitter, but because you're finally free. Free to love from wholeness instead of woundedness. Free to choose presence over pursuit. Free to be seen exactly as you are. Because the greatest love story you'll ever experience isn't with someone who makes you question your worth. It's with a part of yourself that never forgot you were worthy in the first place. And when you do, everything changes. Not because the world suddenly offers you better people, but because you finally know the difference between love and its absence. Between someone who chooses you and someone who almost chooses you. Between chemistry and trauma. That knowledge becomes your compass. Not just in love, but in life. You stop settling for crumbs because you remember what it feels like to be full. If this resonated with you, take a moment. Breathe. Know that recognition is the first step toward freedom. You're not broken. You're not too much. You're not unlovable. You're just remembering who you were before the world taught you to forget. What part of yourself have you silenced just to feel loved? The answer might be the key to everything you've been seeking. Not in someone else's arms, but in the quiet return to your own heart. Jung said, your vision becomes clear when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens. This is your invitation to stop dreaming of love and start awakening to it. The archetype you've been chasing was never about them. It was always about you. About the parts you abandoned to survive. About the love you never received and spent your life trying to earn. About the wholeness that was always there, waiting for you to stop running long enough to feel it. When you choose yourself with the same devotion you once offered to those who couldn't choose you, everything changes. The archetype loses its power. The pattern dissolves. And you're finally free to love and be loved from the wholeness you were always meant to embody. That's not just healing. That's coming home.